My title is Senior Editor for Future Mobility, and as I like to say, that's a role in a media company that didn't really exist a couple of years ago. But there is so much activity in that space right now. And on the stage today, there are a number of folks that are directly involved with all of that activity. We are on the cusp of a major change in how we get around, particularly in urban areas, with autonomous vehicles approaching, not entirely clear when they're really going to arrive. So maybe to get some clarity, I'd like to open this up with a question to Kyle Vogt with Cruise Automation, acquired by General Motors last year, and they're doing some very interesting things. Kyle, what is a realistic timeline for when these vehicles begin to arrive, and how do they arrive in the marketplace?
Well, I know the exact date, but I'm not going to tell you. No, so we like to not get specific about exactly when it's going to happen, because we want to make sure when we do say a date, we can commit to that. But I would say that we hear a lot of people talking about 5 years being a realistic timeline, and that we've heard 5 years ago. But 5 years is what I hear a lot right now, and I think based on what I'm seeing and the progress that Cruise and some other companies are making, I think 5 years would be too little, too late. It's happening faster than most people think. And I think what we're going to see first is, given that autonomous vehicles are new technology, tends to be more expensive when it's first developed. We're going to see it roll out first in rideshare environments, likely in major cities. And the reason for that is you can keep those vehicles fully utilized almost all of the time, which means they're making enough money to offset those initial high costs. And then as the technology costs drop and the capabilities of the software and technology increase, we'll see the vehicles expand into more suburban and eventually rural environments, and then perhaps to individual ownership.
So I'd like to roll over to Lior with Uber and Otto. We first started talking when you were just at Otto, which is commercial trucking, automated commercial trucks, and now you're part of a larger mobility operation. Tell me a little bit about what your view, what Uber's view is of the timing for how this unfolds in the marketplace.
Yeah, I think we all are sort of in the day-to-day, and I'll make 2 points. One is it's a very hard challenge, and the way to boil the ocean and solve a hard challenge is by constraining it. Mm-hmm. And as Kyle mentioned, one way of constraining it is in a ride-sharing setting like Uber or Lyft or others. You can constrain the technology to only operate in a certain city, in a certain neighborhood, on a certain street, which is something you can do with a ride-sharing network, because you control sort of the origin and destination of the ride. Another way to constrain it is by going into a specific setting like the highway, where you can do trucks, which is much easier from a sort of a technology perspective, because there's no pedestrians, there's no stop walks, there's no traffic lights on that highway. So it's really about over-constraining the problem so we can sort of get going. Mm-hmm. The other comment I'll make on timing is this sort of a friendly race that we're all at right now is really about just getting to the starting line, not the finish line, because the first sort of unmanned vehicle will, again, happen in a very constrained environment. And it's going to take a while to actually scale that technology to every city around the globe. So really, I think in the next few years, we'll see the starting line, but to actually sort of have cars all around us and sort of the robots roaming the earth in every setting, that's going to be a while to actually develop the technology.
So James, you're part of a new unit at Toyota, a company that produces 10 million vehicles a year. So obviously you have a pretty significant interest in how things unfold. What is Toyota's timeline? How do you see this taking shape in the marketplace and in other applications for mobility more broadly?
I think one of the key things to clarify is, when we talk about SAE level 5 versus SAE level 4, for those who are not familiar, an SAE level 5 system would be a system that could truly be a drop-in replacement for a human driver. That means it can drive under any conditions, any weather, any traffic. But I agree with Kyle and Lior that what we're actually going to see is a level 4 where you add constraints. So either it's highway only, or it's good weather, or the traffic is light. you're going to start to see these deployments. So asking the question, when is it going to happen? If you add enough constraints, it's here today. But to make it really well and to make it really reliable and really safe, so it can truly be a drop-in replacement for a human driver, will take a lot more time. And that's what everybody, I think, is working hard on. Make it work well, make it work cheap. And that's another reason why I think the ride sharing is a good fit for this technology, because you can utilize the vehicle so much higher and then have a fleet operations maintain it. Yeah.
So Richard, going down to you in terms of analyzing this, the Center for Automotive Research, where do you call it?
Well, we're a research company, so we call it based on what people tell us, and then we call it based on their thoughts. A lot of companies are very similar to what Kyle had said, 5 years. I'm hearing 4 years a lot, 2021. There's a Dutch shuttle company that says they're going to do it next year, so 2018. Arguably, some have already done it, Nutonomy, Navia, and some others. Arguably, even Tesla at a very constrained way, if you take Lior's comment. GM's got the Super Cruise coming out that'll have, again, limited capabilities within a little less than a year. So I think if you take that period between roughly, early 2018 through 2021, we expect to see 4. And I agree with James. 5 that's almost a whole nother leap.
Do you want to define level 5 to make sure everyone's clear on what the distinction is between level 4 and level 5?
Well, neither one of them requires a human theoretically to ever have to take control. You are not the backup plan. You're there for the ride. But under some very extreme circumstance of mechanical failure, things like that on a level 4 system, you might have to step in. Level 5, they could be running around completely empty, delivering packages, doing all sorts of things like that. Human operation of any type is not expected. And it's a whole nother bar up there, and we see that further out. In fact, I'm a little unhappy with our own projections, because I kind of see this as vaguely exponential, but then I've got 5 kind of off the exponential, and I look at it, and the engineer in me says, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't follow the mathematical progression, but the experts keep telling me, no, it's going to take longer. But we'll see how fast these deep learning systems can learn, and then maybe 5 comes sooner than we thought.
So let's shift a little bit, and let's go into the early 2020s when autonomy in some form is more widely available. What is Microsoft doing? Where's your car? I haven't seen spy shots of the Microsoft mobile.
And you won't. So to be clear, unlike many of our peers in the tech industry, we are not making cars ourselves. But our mission at the company has always been to empower everybody to be more productive. That's our wheelhouse. And so when we looked at this space, many of our longtime enterprise customers, as they build their way from self-driving to fully autonomous driving, they're looking to us for solutions. Some of the things that we have might not be in our customers' wheelhouse, like big cloud infrastructures, cybersecurity context in place so the data stays protected. So when we looked at the data that says something like every year Americans spend about 300 hours in their car, and if they're over this time period getting more and more autonomous, as cycles free up in the car, maybe we could use those cycles for our customers to be more productive. So that's sort of our play in this space. And so we have come out with, at CES in January, the connected vehicle platform. So we're using our Azure cloud along with our productivity tools and packaged it up in a way that the automotive manufacturers can take it and put their own differentiated customer experiences on top. And they're all different. They all are coming at it from different perspectives. Some are focused on in-car voice recognition for safety purposes. Others are looking at doing more in the car, dictating emails, one button push to get into Skype. Volvo just launched that with us. So there's a lot of different ways that they're coming at it, and we just wanted to be there for them.
So realistically, though, are we going to be using all of that time to be productive, or are we going to be entertaining ourselves?
I think there'll be a little of each. Yeah. You have to kind of build for both worlds.
Kyle, given what you're working on for General Motors, what are the limiting factors right now that need to be overcome? Is it the software? Is it the vision sensor technology, mapping all of it? What are the stumbling blocks right now?
I think all of the core technical challenges, I wouldn't say they're solved, but there's a path to solving them very quickly. There are some regulatory challenges in different places at a state-by-state level and at the federal level that we're going to need to see innovation on before these vehicles are deployed at scale. But I think what's often overlooked is that, as Lior mentioned, this is a really challenging problem. And what we're seeing today are a lot of really interesting demonstrations, maybe where there's a person sitting behind the seat ready to take over, or a highly scripted, polished demonstration. But what we're not seeing right now is the enormous amount of work that's still left to be done to take a proof of concept into a production level product that can go hundreds of thousands of miles without a significant failure. And that's sort of the unglamorous, unsexy part of the job that has to happen. And that's where we are right now. I think the expectation is a little bit ahead of reality or what we've seen. And so the technical challenge remaining, I think, is really just polishing and grinding this technology to the point where you and I would feel safe riding in it or putting our families in it.
So with that in mind, James, I'm going to go back over to you. Toyota, because of the scale of the company, the volume at which you operate, the company tends to be very conservative and very careful about every new product that it introduces. So this idea of testing and validation, at what point does Toyota feel comfortable enough to begin releasing fully autonomous vehicles or near fully autonomous vehicles onto the marketplace?
I mean, I think the challenge, as Kyle said, is really about polishing and putting enough investment in the engineering to make it very capable and very reliable and very safe. And Toyota, of course, as a brand, is really interested in making sure all of its products are really robust and reliable. And I think what's different is that now the car is no longer just a mechanical system. It has so much software. And when we're talking about these advanced safety and autonomy systems, the amount of software and the complexity of the software is so high that you really need to approach it and think about testing in a different way. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we are thinking about is, right now, a lot of people are looking at how many miles has it traveled, but not every mile is equal. So if I built a system that did 1 million miles in an open road in South Dakota, that's different than doing 1 million miles of rush hour traffic in Manhattan. So I think what we need is actually a new metric for measuring the capability that's beyond just the number of miles. It really should be about the complexity and the number. Mm-hmm. And both of those two things together, we can measure the performance. But one of the big questions that our group has been thinking about is how safe is safe enough? You can do all the due diligence on the engineering side and show statistics of how well the system works, but it's really up to us as a society to answer that question. We think the benefits of the technology are clear, mm-hmm. But there's also risks, and how do we come to a good point where the society, I like to use the example of elevators. 100 years ago, every elevator had a human operator in it. And if you read some of the articles around that time when human operators began to leave elevators, some people would say, I'll never go in an elevator that doesn't have a human operator. And of course, now we take it for granted. So I think it'll take time. It'll take a societal understanding of the convenience of the technology and the benefits of it. But all the engineering teams are working really, really hard to make it high quality and reliable. And that's some of the unglamorous work that's going on.
So on top of that, in addition to the technical challenges, the programming challenges, the validation challenges, we do have this regulatory body, lots of individual states and a federal government. Richard, are you sort of up to speed on how that's playing out? Do we have, are we getting clarity in terms of overall regulation for this new space?
We kind of were in the fall. Now things are a little bit up in the air. So two things. The NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, released a federal automated vehicle policy statement back in September, and it lays out a pretty good roadmap. It basically says we'd like automakers to submit a 15-point plan for how they're going to handle different situations when testing automated vehicles. We want to know how they're addressing privacy, cybersecurity, software, and 11 other things. The test plan, share the data with us, please, things like that. It's not a mandate. It's voluntary for now. They're talking about maybe making it a mandate. They're trying to avoid a hodgepodge of state regulations, so they're asking the states to be a little conservative and not rush out to pass various things and make it difficult for companies like James and Kyle's, so that we have consistency across the states. Because remember, licensing vehicles and licensing drivers is a state function, not a federal function right now. And probably the most scary thing in that policy for OEMs or automakers is they'd like to expand their regulatory power to a pre-approval, which doesn't exist at NHTSA right now, more like the FDA with drug testing, and they want to check your software before you put those vehicles out there. And again, it's not in place yet, but they're talking about potentially doing it. Meanwhile, at the state level, there's a handful of 10 or 12 states that have passed various things. And then there's a theory out there that if we haven't explicitly disallowed it in any state, it's by definition allowed, the way U.S. law works. And Bryant Walker Smith, who's a law professor at the University of South Carolina, has been the leading proponent of that view. If we haven't outlawed it, go ahead and do it. And I think the companies are like, yeah, we're looking for a little more positive action than just take our chances. So I think it will lag, actually, Alan. The technology will probably be there before regulation. Regulation takes a long time, as it turns out.
So shifting a little bit, Lior, Uber has a goal of being basically the biggest mobility company on the planet, and autonomy has become central to the future of the company. Talk a little bit about this vision. What does the world look like if we spin forward to 2025, 2030, where there's been more significant technical advancement? You've got Uber trucks, Otto trucks, delivery services, on-demand autonomous service. What is this vision? How does it all fit together?
I think it starts with the current reality, which is pain. In a city like LA, a third of the land is reserved for cars, for parking lots. Mm-hmm. We spend probably an hour, 2 hours a day in traffic, and our cars are not used 96% of the time. So the current utilization of the concept called a car is not very effective, and really in the future, you get those assets to be further more utilized and more efficient by A, making them autonomous, and B, making them shared. If you look at a city like, where Uber will deploy a product like Uber Pool, which start to take cars out of the road by combining people into the same car, you see 10, 20, 30% of the cars in downtown area actually going out, mm-hmm. and leaving the roads more open for and being more efficient. So we view that future of autonomous driving as a future where we can utilize those and predict those assets in cars to be much more predictable, which will lead for the ability to actually share them much more effectively, which will lead for a state in which we can all sort of tap a button in our pocket and within a minute sort of get a very affordable ride, maybe with someone else, and get a lot of the existing cars out of the road and be much more efficient. And in the process, reclaim a lot of the land that is utilized now for a lot of other uses.
So what if I have a small family? I've got like three small kids. I've got 3 car seats, and I'm in a hurry to get somewhere else. How long do I have to wait for a robotic Uber with the appropriate number of child seats?
Well, the beauty of the robots is you can actually perfectly position them based on the demand, and you can get a car to you pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. The other benefit of having that fleet is it doesn't have to be one solution fits all, but we're going to see probably a sort of a fragmentation of various types of assets, whether it's a 1-seater or a 2-seater or a 4-seater, or maybe you'll have sort of a kid-friendly car with everything you need for your kids, or maybe you'll have something with a big trunk because you're on your way to the airport. So it's much easier to actually have that supply ready for you in that future. And I think it's going to be gradual. A lot of the families today in the US are owning 2, 3 vehicles. I think we're going to see the sort of second vehicle drop initially, because you can get to a price point in which sort of a ride is always guaranteed to you in a very affordable way, whether you're in the city or in the suburbs. And a lot of families are going to remain with maybe sort of one vehicle they own. And to get rid of the second vehicle they own, you need to have a very predictable network in place, and that's going to be the next phase after that. So that's on the urban side. On the truck side, which is also something we're now doing with self-driving trucks, it's really about, first and foremost, just making our roads safer. Again, we have, the reason transportation is cool, and we're sort of all doing a lot of resources around this is because we have millions of people dying on the roads every year. Including trucks. If you look at trucks, although they're 1% of the vehicles on the road, they're actually responsible for a quarter of the fatalities. So if you can do something with trucks, which is spending most of their time on the highway, you can lead to a much safer highway where almost 90% of the fatalities are happening. And as you do that, you get those assets to be much more efficient and much more utilized. Again, today, they only utilize an average truck maybe 8-9 hours a day max. You can utilize them 24/7 with the driver still in the cabin, but he can sleep, either use office productivity tool or play Pokemon or whatnot. But the asset is actually now utilized all the time, which will lead to lower prices for consumers of those goods that are being carried and a much lower logistical cost for the shippers of how they conduct their entire logistical network. So that's the future for us for trucks.
So thinking about Microsoft again, what's the revenue opportunity from this new space where you have sort of a captive audience now in transit for, if it's in Los Angeles, an hour, but hopefully not quite that long in the future?
Well, I think the opportunities are abundant, and part of it is because as we move into self-driving, data is sort of the fuel of those cars. It's not a diesel and gasoline anymore, it's data. And that data can offer the auto manufacturers, others in the ecosystem, all sorts of opportunity for new services. They could be safety services, putting a real voice assistant in the car, and you can just talk to her or him and have, as I said, dictate emails, do things like that, be productive. But I think the opportunities are going to far outweigh the risks, and the opportunities for revenue are going to far outweigh the risk. Though I would just want to take the opportunity to say that Silicon Valley is sort of meeting this very traditional industry, and that mantra in Silicon Valley of fail fast and break things is probably not one you want to apply to this industry as we're moving into it. But I just think the revenue opportunities are endless, certainly on the entertainment side as well, particularly with things like 5G connectivity coming in. I think we have just a bigger pipes into the car, and so.
If you want to talk a little bit about 5G, what does that make possible that's more difficult today?
Well, I think think of 5G as just having greater bandwidth in general, and although that may not roll out for a few more years, I think it kind of meets the time when we're going to start to see the first autonomous vehicles, maybe the 2021, 2020 timeframe. And the vehicles can take advantage of these big pipes coming in, whether it's for entertainment or gaming or whatever. And certainly video needs a lot of bandwidth. And largely what's been available on the cars today is just smaller pieces of data flying back and forth. But now we have this opportunity to bring in big chunks of things. And I think that'll just open up all sorts of new revenue opportunities for the car manufacturers and the service providers.
Kyle, on the idea of car-to-car communication, my vehicle needs to know what your vehicle is doing at all times. How essential is that? Is the system that you're developing right now basically able to operate independent of communicating with other vehicles because of how robust the sensor stack is, or do you see car-to-car as vital to get to that level 5 autonomy?
Well, I think the thing to realize is there's two things that are really hard to change right now. One is, installing a piece of equipment in every car on the road that you would need for the V2V communication. And the second, similarly, is the infrastructure that exists in our cities. I think we're at a point right now where the technology for self-driving cars is going to come much sooner than cities will be able to, find a way to fund or build out infrastructure or make changes to their roadways or other things. And so most people, us included, who are working on self-driving car technology are making no assumptions about the existence of any V2V technology or V2I, the infrastructure piece, because fundamentally we can't guarantee that it's going to be there. That said, if vehicles do have V2V technology, we are exploring ways to take advantage of that to make cars a little bit safer. The obvious example would be if you're coming to an intersection and there's a building blocking, visibility of oncoming traffic. Knowing that there's a vehicle there just increases safety by one additional step. But it's important to recognize that because we cannot make any guarantees about that today, we're building the systems to rely or assume that none of that exists.
Mm-hmm. So we tend to focus a lot on the positive attributes, lives saved, the convenience of autonomy, but this is a highly disruptive technology that does threaten some jobs. I mean, James, what does that look like? How does our economy absorb certain classes of jobs that may not exist in 15 years?
Well, I think as with any new technology, there will be an evolution of labor, and particularly, one of the things that Toyota Research Institute is looking at is aging society. In Japan and the rest of the world, we're seeing people living longer lives, and how can they have a longer, better quality of life as they age? And people are talking about aging in place, and so the technology that we're building to make the next generation of intelligent vehicles, we are also building to be embedded in some of the robotics research prototypes that we're building. So we have about a third of our effort looking at what would happen if you had robot technology to support people in the later stages of their life, aging society. When we think about the disruption of labor, I like to use the example of telephone switchboard operators. There used to be 1 million of them in the 1950s in the U.S., and within a decade there were none of them.
They're hanging out with the elevator.
Yeah, but this the invention of the computer and all of the information technology that has grown led to this incredible growth of services, as was mentioned earlier, a service economy. And what some people are saying is different now is that the artificial intelligence and deep learning is starting to disrupt some of those traditional jobs with natural language understanding. And oftentimes now when you make a phone call to a customer support company, you're going to be talking to a voice recognition system. Mm-hmm. So we'll continue to see an evolution, but I'm definitely an optimist that I think that when we talk about labor, would it be possible that if machines are providing a lot of our basic infrastructure to run the society, is it possible to still have full employment by having everybody work 20 hours a week instead of 40 hours a week? Mm-hmm. And then robots will pick up all the slack. And you have more time to spend with your family and your friends. That would be great. But I think it's up to the society to figure out how it actually is structured. And that's something that the technology is going to happen no matter what. We really can't stop that. Mm-hmm. But what we can do is help build the incentives and the society, either through regulations or through other incentives, so that the outcome is something that as humans we desire.
I'm wondering, what is our comfort level with this? I mean, I keep seeing studies that show a lot of different sentiment indicators that especially those who are maybe Gen X or Boomer age are not particularly comfortable with the idea of fully autonomous vehicles. The technology, as has been said, will be ready maybe before we are as a society. Kyle, what do you think about this in terms of the public acceptance of these?
Well, I think with any new technology, it's intimidating at first, and the first people who are going to try it are the people who are excited about just the fact that it is new and there's technology that's interesting and novel. But as with most things, it will follow an adoption curve, and I don't think it will take very long for people to, the early adopters to go on a ride and come back and say, well, it was awesome, it was kind of boring, but it was really cool. There was no driver in the car. And once it is sort of seen that yes, these things are safe, yes, they're more accessible, they're better for the environment. We're not having as many distracted driver accidents or other things like that. I think the adoption will ramp up very quickly. But I wanted to touch on the labor issue real quickly. I think I agree with most of what you said. But one thing I think it's important to realize is there's a disturbing amount of complacency right now around automotive safety in general. We're talking about the number of people that die each year. And what blows my mind is for the first time in a number of years, there's more people who died in car accidents rather than less. We had this great downward trend, and it stopped. And I think that's largely due to distracted driving, people using their cell phones when they're not supposed to.
And the recession.
Yeah, well, yeah. So we're in this situation now where the cars themselves are getting safer. We're putting more technology into them, more collision avoidance technology, but we're having more deaths.
Yeah.
And so I think, on one hand, yes, if your job is to make sandwiches and a robot replaces your job, I think that's a discussion we should have as a society. That's a direct replacement. But here we've got a technology that can address what is the #1 killer of teenagers in the United States, and we should be doing everything possible to accelerate that and get it on the road. And let that be. Let's not lose sight of the real goal there, which is to use this technology to save lives and improve automotive safety.
So we have about, 36,000 traffic deaths in the United States, more than 1 million globally each year. If GM or Toyota or Uber has a system that can take that down to 1/10 of the number of fatalities annually, do we accept that as a society? We say now there'll be 3,500 or 3,600 traffic deaths, but they'll be caused by automated vehicles. Will the public go for that?
Yeah, I think so. 40% of fatalities are drunk driving incidents. So right away, you can start taking big chunks out. Another big percentage are single vehicle off-road. Now that overlaps with drunk driving, as you may have guessed, but there's other reasons for that too. Signalized intersections, the side impact crash. When you get hit side impact, there's like this much metal between you and the thing that hits you. So yeah, 10%, I'd say even less than that, and we would still accept it. If we could go from, we're back up to Kyle's point, during the depths of the Great Recession, we went down to about 33,000 fatalities a year in the US from motor vehicle crashes, and that includes pedestrians and bicyclists and things like that. We're back up to about 38. Vehicle miles traveled is way back up, exceeding pre-recession levels, but disproportionately high relative to the safety technology that's come in, as Kyle's pointed out. And I happen to agree, a distraction is probably definitely the cause therein. Even if we never got a level 4 or level 5 vehicle, and I think we will in the few years from now that we talked about, just the added driver assistance and the safety that comes with that. It was one of James' colleagues said to me about a year and a half ago, so far at Toyota, all of the customers that come through the door wanted to buy a vehicle that they could drive. That paradigm will change. But even if we just help them drive better, safer, with warnings and emergency braking and things like that, we're going to start to bring those numbers down. So we're going to accept various parts of automation, and eventually with some generational turnover and some other things like, what if I have some disability or my physical skills are deteriorating as I age? A lot of baby boomers getting old right now and their eyesight's going and things like that. They've been used to a lifetime of personal mobility. So when you tell me, you really shouldn't be driving anymore, but problem solved. You don't have to. Uber's going to come and get you, take you where you need to go, automated or otherwise. We're going to extend your mobility. And those kids going to soccer practice, once they get above, I don't know, what age are you comfortable putting them in by themselves? 12, 13, 14, certainly not younger than that probably. And you just make the family life a lot happier because you're not shuttling kids and grandparents around all day. Acceptance will come quick when you start seeing those benefits.
So I wonder, again, going back to Microsoft, the software company, for you want to keep people in these vehicles as long as possible because, again, it's more of a revenue opportunity.
Yeah.
So for many of us, the idea is, well, we don't want to spend that much time in transit, in traffic. For this to be valuable for Microsoft, you definitely want to provide these services that people will take advantage of. So in car, I mean, what sort of, if you really go out there, again, 10 or 15 years, what becomes possible if you combine autonomous tech, really robust cellular bandwidth, and maybe VR and augmented reality as well? You could attend virtual meetings in car as well as.
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be at some point anything that you can do in the office or at home, you should be able to do in the car. And I think we come from an interesting perspective in that we have a lot of data about the user, and with their opting in, for us to not take the data, but to use the data combined with what we know about the car, I think we can provide all sorts of experiences that just make that seamless to go from car to office to home. Things like we know your calendar, and if a light goes on in the vehicle, we can already go in the background and talk to the repair shop and say, hey, knowing that they have Saturday at 2 o'clock free, I'm going to tee that back up to the driver. Can you bring the car in then? So it's all about taking the data that we have, taking the data the auto manufacturers have, and what the car itself is producing, and creating experiences that will make that just a seamless part of their day. You don't have to think about, okay, now I'm getting into the car, I have to stop doing certain things. But in general, I just think we can make the cars much safer. I know there's the topic of, when the car has to make a decision. We haven't touched on that yet. I think our part in that is you want to make sure your connectivity is ubiquitous, it's consistent. When you do have to make a decision, you want to have the best amount of data available at that time. You have to ensure against cybersecurity attacks. There's hundreds of thousands of attacks a week now. Those are going to happen in cars, so we have to make sure that the links are secure, they're private, and that we keep those things up and running at all times, or else people aren't going to adopt them. We have to give them an incentive and a reason to adopt these things. And it can't just because I'm being entertained. It's like you have to have more of a reason to that if you're going to be putting your family into these things. And so it has to be a very secure environment from beginning to end.
Well, I'd like to jump from that point, and you alluded to this, the idea of vehicles making ethical decisions. The who do you kill question. Does the vehicle protect the driver at all times, at all costs? Does it occasionally run into the wall to avoid hitting the school bus? Lior, what's Uber's thinking about this?
Okay, I got the pleasure of answering the trolley problem. I'll start and my colleagues can chime in. I mean, I don't know, how many in the audience have made a conscious choice in their driving career if they go over an elderly woman or a kid? Raise your hand. Okay, thought so. The reality is, first, those hypothetical situations are happening quite rarely, if ever. B, with autonomous driving, as the car is actually much safer, the sensors can see much further away, they can react much faster, they can see 360 around us all the time versus just looking at one direction. Those edge cases should happen even less so. And when you get into one of those edge cases, it's actually very hard to actually fully understand and contextualize the ethical decision you need to be making, because you don't actually can see, is that a sort of a 5-year-old kid or a toddler or a teenager? It's very hard to actually do that. And after it's all said and done, in those rare cases, after sort of 90+% of those cases were avoided, if you actually sort of understand and can comprehend the context, then yeah, I mean, this will be something that we need to sort of as society to take measures and decide on. But I think really all of us for now, it's focusing on solving the core challenge. And if we can show as technologies that the safety bar, we can develop systems that are safer than a human being, I think a lot of those hypothetical questions and adoptions questions would be sort of like self-solved, because it would be very hard to reap out the benefits of just having safer roads with a safer technology for a lot of those hypotheticals. So I don't want to sound dismissive, but it's not something that sort of occupies us day to day. We just focus on showing a system that can be, on average, safer or much safer than a human driver. And I think a lot of those questions will be answered after.
James, you want to weigh in on this one?
So, the goal of building these safe systems is shared among everybody. And I think when we think about the combination of the skills that a human driver are good at and the things that our automated systems are good at. One of the things we've been looking at is how does the technology work together with the human? And we've come up with this concept we call Guardian. Some systems that you're building are meant where the system is driving all the time. It's 100% responsible for it. That means that it really has to be reliable. And there's versions of it where the human driver is there sort of overwatching the autonomy system. And then an important question gets raised. Is it better to have a human sort of overseeing an autonomy system, or the other way around, where the autonomy system oversees the human? And there's a lot of evidence that shows that humans are actually not very good at overseeing autonomous systems. That leads to this issue called overtrust. And ironically, as the system gets better, the problem of overtrust gets worse. Because if the system is experiencing a problem once every 10 seconds, humans are very vigilant. But if it only experiences a problem once every 100,000 hours, humans become lax and not very vigilant, and it leads to a well-studied phenomenon of the vigilance decrement. And so we've been exploring this concept called a guardian, where the overwatching part is reversed, where, for example, a version of that could be the automatic emergency braking systems that is now standard on almost all makes and models of Toyotas in 2017. It's been shown to dramatically reduce the incidence of rear-end collisions, and it'll be required in 5 years. But Toyota, you buy a Toyota today, you're going to have it standard. And what it does is it will help keep the car safe in the extreme situation that it's about to have an accident. And the human does the driving most of the time, but when the human is drunk or distracted or drowsy, the system can intervene and keep them safe. And so we think that this technology actually could be rolled out earlier, and as Kyle said, there's an urgency and a complacency, for not trying to really build safer systems. And one of the good news is that a lot of the technology that you need for a working, complete level 4, level 5 system, you can actually utilize for an advanced Guardian system. And so one of our strategies is to build both of those in parallel, so that we think we can roll out the Guardian systems earlier. And then you have a sort of a symbiotic relationship between the skills of the human and the skills of the system working together.
Kyle, how about at Cruise with General Motors? Do you have an algorithm for ethical behavior?
I'm not going to get into hypotheticals there, but I think what Lior said is important. These things happen extremely rarely. I mean, we've got, at this point, dozens of vehicles in 3 states in the U.S. Many of them are being tested 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, getting miles, encountering new situations, and we've never been faced with a dilemma like that the vehicle has had to make. I mean, if you think about, as Lior said, the ability to react almost instantaneously to something in front of you, the number of times we're just very quickly coming to a stop isn't good enough, is so rare that basically in those situations we find that it's physically impossible to avoid a collision where something was thrown out in front and it's just not possible to move the vehicle out of the way in time. And so the concept of having to make a choice just doesn't come up enough that it has been on the top of our radar. But if it does come down to the point where, despite the increased safety of these vehicles and all the other benefits they bring to cities, which might be increased utilization of the road networks, perhaps they're better for the environment if they're electric and other things. If we decide, given all those things, we still want to put a hierarchy of ethics into these vehicles, we would be open to doing something like that. But I think that that's pretty far down in the order of priorities and benefits that we're going to see from this technology.
So this is something I'm curious about to shift just slightly. And since you're part of Uber, and General Motors owns a big piece of Lyft, and ride hailing has become such a big part of the urban transportation market. In a future where you have on-demand autonomous vehicles that arrive, what is the maintenance process for those vehicles? Let's say I hail a vehicle. The person before me got car sick, or had a 2-year-old with a leaky diaper, or something happened. How are you constantly keeping the vehicles, the cleanliness and and maintaining those vehicles at all times?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think as we sort of move to that future, it's about how do we maintain that, and how do we deploy that, and sort of how do you start thinking about the urban fabric of deploying those cars in masses in cities. Few things. One, there's actually still some social norms that sort of guard people sort of entering and exiting those cars. And to sort of be well behaved. There's also ways to detect if a car is still operational from a sort of ongoing maintenance perspective. Is it safe enough? Are all the parts in place? Is it functioning? Is it clean or not? So you can sort of understand, like first level is just understanding very deeply the state of the car. And if the car is not in a sort of a approachable state for whatever reason, then basically just not deploying it and not dispatching it to the next customer. So I think it starts there. Then it's about thinking about sort of the topology of deploying those cars. The nice thing again about those cars is they don't necessarily have to park in where cars park today. So they can sort of roam around or be positioned in places that parking is more cheap, or they're not actually occupying space. So the ability to actually deploy those, you can sort of think about a way where they're distributed across the city versus just in one center in which they're all dispatched from, which then sort of gets you to a more probably distributed network topology of keeping those cars maintained across the city. And one of the things that we're excited about is actually having a full ecosystem booted up of third-party and facilities and maintenance companies that will actually, both maintain the assets. And the other interesting question that you should ask in this forum is also who's going to own the assets.
Right.
Right? Because
Is Uber prepared to become the world's largest cab company, basically?
probably not. Probably not. And I think that's going to be a very interesting question. I think we're going to see a gradual transformation there. Initially, like any technology, the ROI is going to be more hypothetical, and Uber or other companies that have interest in basically deploying those cars and accelerating the technology will take more of the ownership burden on us. But as sort of the technology is more mainstream, as the ROI argument is more articulated, I think we're going to see a host of companies, whether it's OEMs or other asset owners, that would like to own those assets and sort of have a yield they can actually procure on the existing ride-sharing network. So I think it's going to be a gradual transition, but in the end of the transition, I think we're going to see a wealth of asset owners that are going to have a nice ROI, a predictable ROI on a ride-sharing network, the same way that you can have a predictable ROI on renting real estate or a yield bond today.
So does this become a new financial product, a new investment? You can invest in a mobility fund that's basically constantly paying for the acquisition and maintenance of ride-hailing vehicles?
I think so, yeah. I mean, that's we keep talking about the early days, and we keep talking about the end game, but we don't talk enough about is sort of what are all the opportunities from a societal perspective that will be open to us once we have that common basic societal infrastructure in place. What does it mean to have truck as a service and logistics as a service end-to-end? What does this mean to actually be able to programmatically add to whatever productivity app, like the calendar can self-order the car automatically, and I can just swoop down the stairs and enter my car. What does it mean to actually have that level of predictability on transportation in the future? And part of it will be, there's going to be a whole new financial system built on top of that.
Is that General Motors' view as well?
Some of those things I think we agree on. One of the other things I think is pretty interesting about the maintenance of self-driving cars is, as I mentioned before, we think of them as assets and they're put into service, and your goal is to have them operational or utilized as often as possible. So as close to 24-hour operation as you can get to. And when you look at what that business looks like from an operation standpoint, it looks more like perhaps an airline or something, where you're trying to keep these assets in the air as many hours as possible in a day. And so what do you do to actually enable that? Well, the asset itself is built to last 30 years, its service lifetime. A car that rolls out of an assembly plant today, maybe 10 or 15 years is the target. And there are different assumptions made. When a car is sold today, there's no guarantee that that customer will ever go and get the oil changed ever again. you may never get a chance to update the software, and so a lot more effort goes into upfront work to make this vehicle robust and reliable over its intended lifetime. For this model, the vehicles are being touched or brought into service maybe once a day or once a week. So you think about it more like an airplane where the parts are meant to be swapped out and replaced on a preventative maintenance schedule. And so the end result is you don't have to swap out the entire vehicle like you would every 50,000 or 100,000 miles when it starts to get dated. You can just swap in new parts and keep it going. And one of the things we're excited about with that model is that it's going to drive the cost down over time, because you're going to be able to make one asset last instead of 100,000 miles or 200,000 miles, maybe 500,000 or more.
Richard, you look like you wanted to jump in there earlier.
We've been given some thought too. Lior's question, who's going to own these vehicles? And I think he's right. Uber and Lyft don't. Transportation network companies don't want to own them. Their business model is based on owning 0 cars, because we all bring our cars into the mix. I think Kyle's probably closer, something more like an airline. But is the airline a GM, a Ford, a Toyota, or is it somebody else? Because still today, GM owns lots of cars, and so does Ford and Toyota, but not that are out there in these sort of service models so much. So there could be other players in there. What are car dealerships going to do in the future, for example? If we're not buying cars anymore, for a lot of the reasons Kyle just laid out, because car companies want to make sure you keep the software up to date, you keep it well maintained so it operates well when it's automated and can be trusted, and all the things we've talked about. So maybe dealerships become these localized nexuses for where cars park at night at 2 a.m. because they already got lots of space for that. They've got high bays for repair. They can do oil changes. There seems to be some assumption that eventually automated vehicles are electric vehicles. I think that's a ramp-up curve when we're sitting on somewhere around 3% of any kind of electrification and less than 1% of pure electric vehicles right now in the U.S. There's some ramp-up time to get to that point, and that solves some of the issues. You don't need oil changes anymore. You don't need a human to stick the gas into the tank. You can probably do some sort of wireless charging or induction charging as you go, and we'll start seeing that on transit very soon, actually, if not already. And it'll be interesting. Will travel services companies want to own big fleets? And when you go down to Florida for vacation, they've got all these vehicles available to you, and you buy them and rent, not buy them, but you buy mileage as you need it. That's kind of what I would see happening, and very much like an airline model, but back when there were lots of airlines and not just 4 or 5.
Mm-hmm. I wonder, Microsoft, again, on the software side of things, how much thought are you giving to data security, cybersecurity of these vehicles? Is that a service that you want to work with OEMs?
Absolutely, and I don't think they need to recreate it, because we spend about $1 billion a year on cybersecurity, and probably more going forward. So it's something that we have this huge investment in. It's taken really decades to build up data centers all over the world that the global companies, the automobile manufacturers who are largely global, can tap into. So that is definitely a service that would be interested in playing a part in. I think there's other interesting business models around this. There's insurance. I think the insurance industry will completely change. It'll be pay how you drive, pay as you drive. When you're only in the car for 18 minutes, do you really need an annual insurance plan? Probably not. We need one for 18 minutes. So, and then the data that we're going to be pulling off the vehicle can inform the insurance companies of how to charge for that. There's certain categories you would charge more for, others less. Looking at driving habits across the demographics, I think we're just going to have all sorts of data that can feed into new business models around this world that we're headed into. I think payments is another one. Someone will have to be the payment providers, or probably multiple people will be the payment providers for in-vehicle purchases. So all sorts of interesting sort of second-tier effects that I think either we could play in or opportunities for other companies.
Well, I wonder, maybe just sort of a last topic to think about, because we are in Los Angeles, and if we're famous for anything, it is bad traffic. We are the capital of cars and congestion. And I wonder maybe if we can just sort of go down the panel, starting with James. 2030, what is LA like? What impacts do we see in Los Angeles? How does this make things better?
I heard a statistic that in Los Angeles County, something like 13 square miles are dedicated to parking lots. And in the US, there's roughly 1 billion parking spaces for about 250 million cars. When we're looking for parking, we don't think that we have a 4-to-1 vacancy rate, but it is, it's true that when we talk about utilization of the vehicle, we can also think about utilization of real estate. And one of the interesting potentials of this technology when we think 2030 or even later is how could we transform the way cities are designed. Right now, a lot of them are built around manually driven cars, but we could think about a future where we build urban centers, and the world globally is moving towards cities. Our cities are growing a lot faster than our rural areas. And so we have to think about what is the mobility, safe, accessible transportation system that we can build for cities of the future, and rededicating and repurposing land that is in our urban centers that's currently dedicated to parking lots or refueling stations could then become green spaces or residential or commercial, and as a dynamic network routing routes packets of information, we will have an intelligent transportation network that will route matter, people and packages throughout our system. And I think there's a lot of really exciting ideas, and honestly, we don't know what the answer is, but I think it will be truly exciting to see what will come in the next decade.
Sounds good. Lior, do you agree with James' vision?
It's hard to predict the next 12 months, so 12 years in advance. I'll take a shot. I do think we're going to reclaim a lot of the space, as James mentioned. Parking garages are unneeded. Last year, there's been more space built for parking spaces in homes than 1 or 2 bedroom homes across the US. So we're building more space for cars than people, even in residential homes. I think that's going to change as well. So we're definitely going to reclaim a lot of the land. We're definitely going to have a much more environmental friendly, I think, transportation system, because, as Carl mentioned, you can actually maintain those assets better, because you can share, because you can do a lot of things that are not sustainable today. I think the current transportation density will be more efficient, more utilized, because we can pool people together. Again, we're already seeing that from Uber pool today. Jury's out if there'll be less congestion or not, because one thing that, and your guess is as good as mine, once we make transportation easier and more affordable, people tend to actually use that capability to commute more. So for example, if you can get to an autonomous car and just get to your workplace, will that change your definition of a suburb? Is now your acceptable commute 30 minutes or an hour? Or maybe it's now 2 hours, because you can go and just sleep in your car. Sort of what this will do to the actual traffic patterns, it's very hard to predict, and I'm not sure if we'll end with less people on the road or more people on the road.
Right. Peggy, any thoughts?
Well, I grew up here. I learned to drive on the 405, just by the virtue of me saying the in front of 405, I grew up here. And God forbid the Pasadena Freeway, which is, I believe, the oldest freeway in the country. It still has exits that say 5 miles per hour, because it was built when cars couldn't go over 25 miles per hour or 20 miles per hour. So the first thing, and following on in the spirit of reclaiming, I would say just take cars off of the Pasadena Freeway altogether, and just make only autonomous cars are allowed on the Pasadena Freeway, because that will make that highway much, much safer than it is. That would be my guess of what the future will look like.
Kyle?
Los Angeles.
Well, I think in general, cities tend to be getting more populated, more dense. We're building up. The road networks are flat. So we have this problem where it's really hard to expand the road networks. We have more and more people. So what do we do about that? Well, you can increase the speeds. You can build more roads, which is really hard. The real way to do that, I think, is to get it to the vehicles. You can fit more vehicles on the same road, or more passengers in a vehicle using things like Uber Pool, for example. And platooning vehicles really tightly together. All of those cool things can't happen while there's still people in the cities, because they'll get in the way of this tightly orchestrated, thing that's happening in cities. And so by 2030, I hope we've made progress towards pulling people off the roads.
Richard, the last word is yours.
Yeah, and the transportation land use nexus is very complicated because land use and building changes slowly. Buildings last even longer than the 20 years that a car does. So changing that urban form takes time. So this will evolve. I think it'll be more than past 2030, although we should see some progress by then. And a lot of it, Lior said, I think, in the very first comment he made here today, which was we have to change a little bit of travel behavior. So it's the Uber pool kind of thing where we get vehicle occupancy up, because the vehicle occupancy is still 1.08 of actual, not counting, you know, drivers waiting to hit an emergency button or something like that. They're just along for the ride. But of actual passengers, then congestion definitely goes up because you've got 0 occupancy miles out there that we don't have so much of today. So getting occupancy up and a fully integrated, optimized system, that's where Peggy and Microsoft and Cisco and other companies are going to come into play, because it's going to optimize across all modes. So some of these driverless shuttles getting me to a 30-mile train ride, perhaps, where the capacity is there to move people quickly and the like, and fully optimized across modes, and then we're going to reclaim that land and see lots of improvements. It might be 2040 before we see a lot of that, but by 2030, Kyle's right, I hope we see a lot of progress by then.
Great. Well, that's a lot to think about. Panel, thank you very much, and thank you for joining us today.